The Boeing 757, introduced in the early 1980s, is today described as a bit of a pocket rocket, but also a versatile workhorse that, yes, changed the industry for the better. When production for the aircraft ceased, it left a gap in our market, many would argue, but rounded off a generally fantastic multi-decade period of production for a type that took the industry by storm. However, this story took a different turn just before production came to a close, with the introduction of the 757-300, a variant that ultimately failed commercially and contributed to the end of the 757 program. But what were some of the contributing factors? Was it always written on the wall? And what was next for the program after this failed variant? The Boeing 757 series initially began by responding to the aviation industry's demand for a more efficient and higher capacity narrow-body aircraft. The 757-200 was the initial model in the series and gained popularity for its operational flexibility among other very favourable features, making it a pretty common choice for airlines right around the world. Production for the 757 would peak in the 1990s when the plane maker was shipping off around 100 aircraft annually. As with any program, these numbers began to eventually decrease, as more aircraft were being delivered than orders coming in, and the backlog continued to reduce. As a result, the manufacturer started to explore ways to keep interest in the program high. Studies began involving a stretched variant with a higher capacity that would therefore meet potential customers' needs that required a plane of these capabilities. In steps the 757-300. It is one of the more uncommon 757 variants thanks to its poor commercial performance, but one can still say that it played a role in the program. Despite several key sales pushes for the -300, Boeing could not really garner interest in this type, and in the end, Boeing gave it up. Unfortunately, overall, there were several contributing factors that led to the commercial failure of this variant. One significant challenge was the timing of the 757-300's introduction. By the time Boeing offered the extended version of the type, industry trends were shifting and Boeing arguably got caught out. Airlines either preferred smaller, more efficient aircraft or larger, wide-body jets capable of longer-range flights. This would be, in some senses, the 737 program, the A320 series, or if I'm looking higher, then we have the A330, 777, or in the future, the 787. Moreover, many existing 757 customers had already committed to the -200. They weren't necessarily inclined to order more 757s and maybe were of that firm belief that they had already exhausted the series for all they needed from it. Now, it is important to note this wasn't the case for all customers, as some did see a need for a 757-300, but for the large majority it was the case, and it is more than evident through a brief comparison of the -200 and -300 in terms of its sales. For ease, see this Wikipedia chart, which highlights the total 1,049 deliveries for the program. Of these, 913 came for the 757-200 and only 55 for the latter released 757-300 that I'm taking a look at today. The difference is light and day, and with an introduction coming sometime later, many would argue that the delays led to the -300 market struggling and commitments just not being there. Timing also plays a crucial role in any aircraft's commercial viability. Had the 757-300 been introduced earlier, when the demand for such a plane was more present, well, its fate might have been a little bit different. Unfortunately, though, the delay in its release resulted in a bit of a mismatch between the aircraft capabilities and the airline industry's evolving needs. Didn't stack up, and that was more again than evident through the performance of this variant in the market. However, its overarching performance did have larger repercussions on the 757 program, more than just one variant. The lack of sufficient orders and commitments for the 757-300 ultimately led Boeing to close the 757 program. You may recall a little bit earlier in this video, I discussed how the -300 was in response to the slowing down of the 757-200. This was their goal, to extend the life that little bit further, and you could argue that it did to a certain extent, but ultimately, as it failed to bring in orders, Boeing needed to look to shift away from the niche of the type and move towards more of what the market was calling. This was your next generation of aircraft. Now, in regards to the 757's place within today's industry? Well, it holds a unique position. It is known as a workhorse, from transcontinental flights to charter services, and in some instances being a freighter solution, although some would say that the freighter aspect of the 757 certainly wasn't as large as maybe it could have been, but albeit it is now in a much more limited capacity. The series has had its fair shares of ups and downs, but it is important to remember that production closed towards the early 2000s. We're approaching now 2 decades since that moment, and yes, the aircraft is actually still pivotal to several airlines' day-to-day operations, which in my opinion at least is a testament to the 757 as an aircraft type. But in some cases it also presents another position to take a look at. And that is that some customers that rely on the 757 still today as we approach 2024 are doing so because they're not able to find an adequate replacement. According to some, Boeing has never actually truly released the perfect 757 replacement. For several carriers, especially within the United States, that statement could not be more truer. As I've covered on multiple occasions now, whether it has been here on GlobeTrotting or on the DJ's Aviation website, per sources at, say, Delta, well, they're an airline that, yes, is being forced to adapt, but they've retained these 757s for much longer than other customers because they just don't know how to adequately replace them. In the case of United Airlines, they've had no choice but to replace the 757, but the case could certainly be made that if Boeing had put forward a perfect replacement, even if it came towards the latter stages of the 2010s, ignoring all the negative stories that would then occur with the plane maker, well then a lot of these airlines may have been swayed back into Boeing's favor. But the reality is, at least for United Airlines, they're having to look elsewhere to replace the workhorse. The 757-300's commercial failure overall can be attributed to several defining factors, whether that be timing, many would argue, or maybe it is just its overall capabilities. It came too late and just didn't fit in with the shifting trends of airlines, who no longer had a desire for a type like this, among many other reasons. Now, if the -300 had come, say, 10 years earlier, well, a different conversation maybe had, but that just leaves us with nothing but the ifs, buts, and maybes rather than the firm facts. And that is, the 757-300 did not perform well from an order standpoint. And not long after a late sales push for this variant that failed, Boeing would end production of the iconic workhorse. But at least today, even if those numbers are reducing, the series does still fly and plays an important role for many airlines. That is going to conclude today's analysis on the 757-300 and its performance within the market. If you have any thoughts, you're more than welcome to drop them down below in the comments. Thank you very much for your continued support here on the channel. It certainly does mean a lot. Please do take care, do also be safe, and I will see you next time.